So let's start at the beginning here. In material, anywhere we have inventory, this is going to happen. So if we have material, sometimes we call it raw material. Whatever we start off with, plus whatever raw material we buy, is what we have available to us. And at the end of the period of time we're considering, we can look and see how much material we have left, and the material that's missing must have moved out. So let's just say that with raw material, let's look at it in terms of numbers of units. And we will say beginning inventory is 0, and we purchased, that is, we brought in 100 units. And if we brought in 100 units, then we would have 100 units available for us to work with. If we looked at our ending inventory of raw material and found that we only had 30 units in inventory, that must mean that 70 units went out. Well, where does raw material go? Assuming none of it was indirect, was used for indirect purposes, and everything was used for direct purposes, it would have gone into work in process. So we have our in for material, purchases of raw material, and we have our out of raw material, what's missing. And the out for raw material is one of the ends for work in process. I'll show you what I mean. If we're looking at raw material, if we're looking at work in process, we can look at the beginning inventory, and when we're in work in process now, we can't. It's a little harder to look at units for work in process. It's a little easier maybe to think about cost of beginning inventory. The reason I say this is that some units of work in process may be partially complete. Some units may be barely started, some units may be almost finished, so it's hard to come up with equivalent units. We do that, but at the moment, let's not think about that. Let's just think about work in process as being beginning inventory. It's a total cost of beginning inventory, and then additional costs are added to our work in process. That's our N. Material, labor, and overhead. 3 different kinds of costs get added to work in process. So for work in process, we have a beginning inventory cost, and then we add costs to that, material, labor, and overhead. And that's how much work in process we have available for that period. Well, if we look at how much work in process costs we have left at the end of the period, then anything that's missing went out. So anything that goes out of work in process went out because it was finished. So we're going to have transferred some costs out of work in process into finished goods. And finished goods, as we've already said, works the same way. We have a beginning balance of finished goods plus whatever comes in, which would be the work in process costs that were transferred over. So the work in process amount that's going out is the finished goods amount coming in. So the beginning inventory of finished goods plus the addition of cost out of work in process into finished goods gives us how much is available for finished goods. And then if we look to see how much finished goods we have at the end of the period, anything that's missing must have been sold, so it would be in cost of goods sold. Now, the benefit of thinking in these terms is this. We go through this process of beginning inventory plus what comes in, minus what goes out, minus what's left is what went out. We go through that process for material, work in process, and finished goods. We have a different name for the ins and the outs for each one of these. So the out, the in for material is going to be material purchases. The out for material is going to be the material that's used, the direct material that's used anyway. The work in process out is going to be called cost of goods manufactured. So finished goods, the in is called cost of goods the cost of goods manufactured. The out for finished goods is called cost of goods sold. Well, all this gets really confusing. And you need to know those terms if you're talking to managerial accounting people. So I don't want to diminish the importance of that, but if you think about this, you're just doing the same thing over and over again, once for material, once for work in process, and once for finished goods, and you're just renaming whatever costs are coming in and whatever costs are going out. You're just renaming it for each of these activities. So I'm not a big fan of memorization, but if you need to be conversant in this topic, what I have given you here is maybe something that might be worth committing to memory on in some manner. Find some way to lock it into your head. It's pretty logical, but it's also quite easy to get confused.